All right, I think we're live. Krista, can you confirm that I'm on the screen?
You are.
Hooray, I'm here. It's
You are on the screen.
my clock says 1:31.
Can you hear me, Curtis? You are.
Hooray, I'm here. Yeah, we got a bit of a delay from the time the audio hits the computer to the time that you can hear it. All right, it's 1:32. There might be a couple of people just straggling in, coming back from lunch, or a bit of a late lunch, but hopefully people have started to tune in. Welcome everybody. My name's Curtis Robinson. I'm a clinician with Community Living North Bay and a registered psychotherapist. Thanks for joining us today for this chat about building resilience and using your strengths to help manage stress. This is part of Community Living Month and a little bit of extra stuff to help build in some wellness. I have Krista Gibson, who's on the line on my phone with me today, and she's going to help manage the chat and offer some feedback because I'm going to hope to hear from some of you today, so she's going to help with that. Today I'm hoping to have a bit of a discussion about stress and managing stress, and of course, it's something that we all face on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes there's periods in our life where our stress might be a little bit louder than others. So I'm hoping today that we're going to have some useful conversation and that you're going to leave today with maybe something that you didn't have before you came. So I am going to provide a little bit of information today. I did provide through the email, or there was an email that got sent out with a worksheet that kind of goes along with the chat today. If you don't have it, don't fret. This is just for you to help kind of go through and answer some of the questions that I'm going to be putting up on the screen and kind of throwing at you, and you're free to hear the questions and write down some answers, write it on a scrap piece of paper, back of your hand, whatever you'd like. If you didn't get this worksheet and you'd like a copy of it, you can email me. I had my email up on that first slide there. You can email me after the presentation and I will forward a copy of it to you, and you can email Krista as well and she can forward a copy to you after the presentation. So I wish I had all the answers today. I know stress is something that we all experience and it pops up in our life, and I wish today that I could just give everyone this magical recipe and these easy steps to eliminate stress from their lives. I don't have all the answers, but I'm hoping today we're going to have some useful conversation. There is a chat bar. You should see it. I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen in YouTube if you scroll down a little bit. And that's a spot where you can enter in some ideas and some thoughts. I'm going to throw some questions at you and ask for you to reflect and think about some of the things that we're chatting about, and you can pop in some information there, and I'll defer to Krista on that because I'm not monitoring the chat, but I'll defer to her and ask you guys what you're saying and how some of the information is resonating with you. In order to enter your information into that chat, you do have to have a YouTube account and you have to be logged in order to pop some information in there. So if you have a YouTube account, you can log in and you'll be able to use that chat feature. If you don't have a YouTube account, that's okay as well. Krista will be monitoring her email throughout our talk today. And anytime I mention a question or I kind of throw a question out there, if you want to offer some feedback to that question, you can email Krista. Her email address is there, and I'll defer to her for some feedback. Maybe I'll throw it out there now. If anybody is logged in and is using the chat feature, I'll ask Krista if you can see that. And Krista, if you want to just interrupt me and let me know if you see people popping their names into the chat and just kind of saying a hello. Don't be shy. Feel free to say hi. All right. Krista, feel free to interrupt me as I go if you start seeing some hellos pop in.
Maria says hi.
Oh, hello.
Right.
Thanks for saying hello.
Krista, feel free to interrupt me as I go if you start seeing some hellos pop in. Maria says hi.
Great, there's some people here. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you as we continue on with today.
Great, there's some people here.
So I thought I would start our conversation with talking a little bit about stress and what stress is. And you know, it's something that we all kind of experience in different ways and different points in our life. And stress is really a reaction that we have. It's a feeling, it's an experience that we have that kind of sets us off balance. We typically have a way of being, we typically have a way of going about our day, a way of thinking, a way of feeling, a way of acting. And when something happens that challenges that typical day-to-day experience, it throws us off balance a little bit, and we have a reaction in our mind and in our body. I like to think about it as kind of like us walking along a balance beam or a tightrope. And, you know, we have that sense of balance, and then when something happens, you know, something potentially stressful, or, you know, I lose a lot of things. That's commonly a stressful thing for me, and it's usually my wallet, my phone, or my car keys. That's the powerful trifecta for me. I lose one of those things, and when I have that moment where I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't find my car keys, and I'm running around the house pulling up the couch cushions and whatnot, it throws me off balance a little bit. I have some kind of reaction in my mind and in my body, and I start to worry. I start to think, oh my goodness, I'm not going to find it. I'm going to be late for work. I start to pace. You know, my heart might start to pump a little bit louder, a little bit faster as I'm trying to find my car keys. So things happen, and we start to get off balance. It's like walking across that tightrope, and all of a sudden there's a gust of wind that starts to set us off balance a little bit, and we start to feel uneasy. And stress reactions, they can be acute, meaning they happen in the moment. It's a moment of me losing something, of me driving and, you know, getting cut off, or me getting, yesterday or the other day, it was getting stopped by that train and having to wait for that train to pass. Or it can be chronic. It can be repeated things that kind of happen over and over. It can be, you know, not getting enough sleep. It can be, you know, having a lot of things to manage in a day. And our body, you know, has that reaction. We start to, you know, feel worn down. We start to feel tired. We start to feel sick. And it affects our mind and our body and our way of being. So there's certainly a lot of different ways that stress can affect us, and I just kind of listed some of them here for us to think about, and because it's, you know, stress it's not just something that affects how we think and how we feel. Often we talk about feeling stressed, but it affects a lot of our different kind of systems or categories within our life. You know, physically, our body reacts to stress. You know, I mentioned, you know, your heart races, your blood pressure goes up. There's a chemical cascade of neurological and hormonal changes that kind of just happen naturally because we experience something that's stressful. And these are pre-wired reactions. It's stuff that we don't control. It's things that are built into our biological makeup. It can result in us feeling worn down, tired, upset stomach, you know, having headaches, not being able to sleep. There's lots of research out there about how, you know, chronic stress, you know, makes you more prone to physical illness and kind of getting run down. Being stressed affects, how we feel. Like I said, we often talk about feeling stressed. We might feel frustrated or defeated. We might feel anxious or worried. If I'm chronically losing those three things, that trifecta in my life, I'm worried I'm not going to find those things again. Being stressed affects how we think. We might be ruminating and thinking over and over about some of those problems and some of those challenges that we're currently facing. It might be hard for us to focus and think. If there's stuff going on in one area of our life, it might make it more difficult for us to focus on other areas like work or family life. And of course, we react, right, when there's stress. We do different things. We have behavioral reactions. There's those fight, flight, and freeze responses, those sort of immediate reactions when we feel stressed. My dog sometimes can be a handful, and I'm working on training him to be a little bit more polite and a little less rowdy. But when he grabs my favorite book and puts it in his mouth and starts chewing on the pages, I might raise my voice, right, like, hey, Charlie, put that down. And that's a reaction, right, that I have in that moment. Stress definitely affects our relationships. When we feel stressed and we're thinking differently and feeling differently and acting differently, it affects people around us. People that see us on a day-to-day basis can kind of tell when something's different, and it affects the way that we relate to people. We might be more distant in some of our relationships. We might not be as interested in sharing or getting together. We might reach out more to certain people in our life if we're feeling stressed. Vocationally, so that's our day-to-day life. That's our job, our school, our things that we have to do during the day. If we're feeling stressed, of course it's going to affect that area of our life. Stress accounts for a vast amount of missed time at work, productivity, not feeling as enthused or motivated in work or school or meaningful activities. So it can definitely affect our day-to-day life. Spiritual, our spiritual sense, and that could include our sense of religiosity, but it can include other things. If people are going through a stressful time and a difficult time, they might talk about just feeling lost. They might talk about feeling like they're not sure what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They're getting up and kind of going through the motions, but they've lost that sense of purpose, that sense of drive. Who am I and where am I going in my life? Those are really common questions that people have, and really common statements and self-reflection that people do when they're experiencing that kind of stress. You'll notice on the top of your worksheet, I did put a little section for you to kind of reflect on, how does stress affect you? I listed out some ideas and some examples, but certainly people aren't affected by stress in exactly the same way. And, you might react or have different, your stress might affect you differently compared to others. So I thought that might be valuable to kind of reflect on, what does it look like when you're stressed, and what do you notice about yourself when you're starting to feel stressed? I was trying to think about, providing something useful and providing a short talk about stress and coping with stress. And I thought, we could spend a great deal of time talking about what the research says about stress and different kinds of reactions and, that biological, psychological, and social changes and all of that kind of stuff. And there's tons of information out there. There certainly is a lot. And we could certainly do that. And, when I was really thinking about how to offer something that would be valuable, I thought what might be more valuable is to talk about this idea of resilience. And, just as people have this capacity to be affected by stress, to feel like, to feel burdened, to feel frustrated, to feel worn down, to feel like, they're losing their sense of purpose and they're having conflict in relationships. Those kinds of things can happen to anybody. There's also this capacity for resilience. There's this universal, inborn kind of capacity to be resilient. The word resilience comes from the Latin resilio, which means to spring back or to bounce back or rebound, recover from stress and adversity. And there's something that's universal and inborn in each and every person to have that capacity. Just like we can have a physical wound, we all have the capacity to get a cut, to get bruises, to get a broken leg, a broken arm. We also have the physical capacity to heal from those injuries. We don't have to tell, our paper cut to heal. We don't have to tell our bones to realign and mend. We don't have to tell our bruises to go away. There's that inborn capacity for our body to heal. And certainly we can do some things to help that heal and promote that healing. But our minds and our emotions and our feelings and our behaviors have that same capacity. They have that same capacity to heal and recover, even in the face of stressful times, obstacles, and adversity. I posted this picture. I'm not exactly sure the story behind this specific picture, but it really spoke to me about this capacity for resilience and coping with adversity. I think the broader picture that I had was some kind of marketplace in a place of the world that faces a lot of difficult climate and rainfall and monsoon seasons and flooding. And I just thought, looking at this woman who's, amidst this water that's at least knee deep and this marketplace has been flooded, she's managed to save the produce and the things that she has. And she's sitting, patiently, doing what she can in this difficult, troubling, challenging time. And it almost looks like she's kind of directing or telling people and kind of taking control of whatever she can in this situation. And certainly it's not going to make the water subside quicker. There'd be no value in grabbing buckets of water and trying to bail out the street. But there's this persistent kind of patient, assertive energy she seems to demonstrate to do what she can in a situation that is certainly quite troubling. There's a great book by Viktor Frankl, and I thought of this morning. It might be a good time to mention it. Viktor Frankl wrote on this book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist and a psychoanalyst who studied under Freud. And he wrote about people's capacity to make meaning and survive really troubling, difficult, and frankly atrocious conditions. He was Jewish, and he survived the concentration camps in Auschwitz, and he was not only a therapist and an author, but he really focused on how people in these awful experiences found the courage and capacity to survive. And he talked about how, people had their families taken away. People had their houses taken away. People had their jobs taken away, their jewelry, their possessions. He had this manuscript that he was working on just leading up to the war, this precious manuscript that he had devoted hours and hours and days and all of this work into this manuscript, and it was taken away from him. And even though people had all of these things taken away, he noticed and reflected on people's capacity to survive these absolutely tremendously challenging and awful times. And it really spoke to the capacity that we have as people to do that. And Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful read. It's available at most bookstores and online. And through his writings and through his work, he touched on something that I think a lot of the field of human development acknowledges. Part of that resiliency and part of finding that capacity to survive and bounce back really relates to this idea of strengths. This idea that we all have skills, traits, talents, things that are within us. Everybody has them. There is not one person that is without them. There's things that we do well, and things that we do to get by and survive and achieve. And we often don't always think about them. I like to say that sometimes they're hidden in plain sight. But the reality is there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of challenges that you have faced and overcome from the time that you were born to the time that you're sitting here and listening to me talk. There are tons of things that you have achieved. There are tons of things that you've made it through, tons of moments where you've shown admirable qualities. And these times of achievement and times of facing challenges, you getting through that didn't just happen by accident. It wasn't just that the stars aligned and it was a situation of circumstance that you just happened to achieve something and you got lucky. There were skills, traits, talents, and things that you did to achieve that. And we don't always think about that, especially during times of difficulty. Sometimes, when we're facing stress and we're facing things that are challenging, we forget about all of that. We forget about all of those things that we're capable of doing and all those times of achievement. I interviewed this woman, and we were sort of having a bit of a support session, and her big concern at that moment was her starting a new job. It was a big career change for her, and she was worried about things going wrong with this new job. She's going to have to interview these new clients and meet these new people, and she had done all this studying and done all this coursework, but now it was kind of like the real thing, and she was really worried about making a mistake or doing the wrong thing. And I think, we could all empathize with starting something new. And if we have a job or have ever had a job, there was a day that, it was our first day and we were new. And, we can certainly empathize with what that feeling would be like. It makes a lot of sense. And I asked her to tell me a little bit about her previous work, what she had done before she looked at a career change. And she told me she worked in corrections for around 15, 16 years, which is a long time. It's a long time to work in a field which I've never worked in corrections, but I assume it certainly has its challenges. And I asked her about, what her colleagues may have thought she did well at that job. I asked her, if you were to imagine, we asked your colleagues here and now about what you did well at that job. What do you think they would say? And she very quickly, thought, and came up with this response that she was dedicated. She was there for 15 years. She was there day in, day out, working with people who weren't always having the happiest of days, but she never gave up. She also thought that she showed a lot of care in that job. There were times where she worked with people who, had some difficult backgrounds and were struggling with substance abuse, and were talking about wanting to make changes in their life and how difficult that was. And it would have been very easy for her to kind of dismiss that. But she thought that she really spent the time to listen. She really spent the time to show that care and show that empathy in those conversations. And she found that, certain people that she'd have these conversations with would reapproach her and have more conversations, and that she was easy to talk to. And she told me a lot about all of these strengths and skills that she used at this past job, and I was pretty astounded and pretty wonderfully surprised that she was able to recognize these strengths. And without even kind of directly asking her, I think just thinking about that, she thought, I think I do have some of these skills that can help me with this next challenge that I'm facing. There was another individual that I spoke with, and he was talking about, again, it was a job situation. He was nervous to apply for a new job. He was nervous about being criticized and nervous about, making a mistake or doing the wrong thing. And I asked him, tell me about a time in your life when you thought you achieved something. And he told me these wonderful stories at great length about how, these friendships that he developed. And he was really outgoing, and people really wanted to befriend him and really wanted to get to know him and spend time with him. And that's an admirable quality. There's something about him that really made people want to gravitate to him. There was some kind of confidence and some kind of a lot of it was humor for him, this outgoing nature that really made people want to connect with him. So I've posted here a couple of things for you to reflect on as well, thinking about some of your strengths. So if you think about yourself, what are some things, outside of whatever stress or things that you're dealing with, what are you most proud of? What's happened in your life that you would say, yeah, like I did that, I accomplished that? What achievements would you say, really meant something to you? And how did you accomplish that? How did that thing happen? It didn't just happen by accident. What things did you do to help that thing come into place? Another way to think about it might be, think about an important person in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a spouse, it could be someone who knows you well. And imagine you were to ask that person what you're good at. What would they say? Someone who knows you and has seen you and been around you, what might they say that you're good at? What do they appreciate about you? People that you enjoy spending time with and enjoy spending time with you, they must do that for good reason. And what do you think those reasons might be? What makes you a person they want to stick around and call up on the phone or send a text message or invite to go somewhere? There's a reason they're reaching out to you or connecting with you and wanting to spend time with you. Even more recently, if you think back about the last week or so, the last couple of days, think about a recent success, a recent problem that you solved, big or small. It could even be an everyday thing. Yesterday for me, one of the things that I accomplished was I had thought about doing an at-home workout, and it had been this idea floating in my mind for a period of time, I think with COVID and with the isolation and all the changes, it's been a really good time for me to enjoy a bit of a break from working out. But I really wanted to try to get a workout in, however big or how small. So that was a success for me. I did that. It wasn't the most graceful, perhaps. It maybe wasn't the most athletic moment in all of my life, but I did it, and that was a success for me. So, if I think about yesterday and how did I do that? Working out, I've been thinking about it for a long time. I developed a plan in terms of having some time in the evening and thinking about the best time for me to do that. I thought about where I might do that. I have some space set up. I have my tablet. For me, a lot of it was time management and planning. Those were strengths and skills that I used to help make that thing happen. And as a result, I at least feel some sense of accomplishment. I feel like it happened once, so maybe I have some more motivation to do that again. I'd love to hear from you. I'm gonna keep talking a little bit, but what are your strengths? What are some things that some strengths that you might have? Some things that have helped you achieve, that have helped you make it through some difficult situations, that have helped you solve a problem, however big or however small. If you can post that in the chat, we would love to hear from you. You can also send an email to Krista at kgibson@communitylivingnorthbay.org. And I'm going to flip my page and make sure I'm not missing anything. And Krista, if you're getting anything from the chats or from the emails, feel free to chime in.
Hi, Curtis. I believe there's a little bit of a delay.
There is.
When people are able to come into the chat.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a delay from the time I'm talking to what they're seeing on the screen. Is there anything coming into the chat?
We have.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a delay from the time I'm talking to what they're seeing on the screen. Is there anything coming into the chat?
Not at this time. A couple people said hello, and a couple people emailed hellos, but in terms of some of the questions that you just posed, no one has added into that at this point yet.
That's okay. We will keep going, and as you're thinking about some of the questions and as I'm going on, it's okay not to have any answers right now. Your first thought might be, I don't know. I don't know what I'm most proud of. I don't know what this important person in my life would say that I'm good at. That's 100% okay. I did post the questions here. I did provide the worksheet. And what I would encourage you to do is to...
One person respond.
I did post the questions here. I did provide
Sure.
the worksheet. And what I would encourage you to do is
That using nature and hiking was supportive.
Oh, that's great.
Another response was being open and approachable to those that you meet throughout life.
That's great. I don't know if you can hear Krista's voice on the phone, but one of them was going on nature and going on hikes. The other one was being supportive and approachable. Those are great strengths to have.
nature and going on hikes.
Any others, Krista?
Being supportive and approachable. Those are great strengths to have.
Not at this time.
Great. So yeah, like I was about to say is, your first response to my questions, I'm asking some hard questions today, and I'm going to encourage you to think, is,
Like I was about to say,
is to hold on to these questions, ponder over them. I said, think about an important person in your life and what would they say? Ask them. If you have a person in your life that you feel knows you really well, ask them, what do they appreciate about you? What would they say that you're good at? Hold on to these questions and spend some time to think about them. So I mentioned this analogy earlier about, stress kind of being like walking on a tightrope or walking on a balance beam. And, when that happens, we feel off balance, it feels uncomfortable, and we want to do something to kind of get back into balance. And stress is like that, right? Stress most often doesn't feel good. Most often we feel frustrated or worried or upset or anxious, all of those things, and typically we don't like those feelings, so we want to try to do something to make things better for ourselves. And there is a lot of great resources out there on coping skills and stress management, deep breathing and mindfulness. Those are really popular, and there's a lot of resources on how mindfulness and relaxation training and deep breathing, yoga, all of those things can be really wonderful to help manage stress and cope with stress. There's a lot of books and resources about cognitive strategies and thought logs and the power of positive thinking. Exercise, physical exercise. There's some pretty well-established research that regular physical exercise can be as effective with anxiety and depression as taking medication or going to therapy. And I think it's important to acknowledge all of those strategies. What I would like to focus a little bit on today is the unique and individual ways that we all cope with stress. A couple of years ago, I was working with an individual who, he was previously, it was previously recommended he go to anger management to learn some coping skills, to learn some ways of managing his anger better. And, he went to learn these coping skills in this kind of instructional manner. Here are some different ways to manage anger. And, that kind of instructional thing really was helpful for some people, and some people really took some things out of that resource. When I asked him, was this helpful? What did you gain from this? His answer was pretty quick, and it was, no, it wasn't helpful, and no, I don't feel I got anything out of it. And what I was really curious with him was, how he was coping with his anger. What was he already doing to manage that? What specific, unique things was he already trying to do to prevent that anger from getting worse? And the more I was curious about that, and the more I asked about that, the more he told me numerous ways that he was managing his anger. He was leaving situations that were upsetting him. He was going for walks and going for a smoke break to calm down. And then when he felt calmer, he would figure out what to do. He was talking to people who he trusted when he felt like it, and taking advice that he thought was helpful. And these were things that nobody taught him. These were things that nobody told him to do. They were things that he naturally did as a response to his anger and as a response to the stress in his life. If you think about walking on that tightrope and walking along that balance beam, when you start to feel off balance, your body naturally tries to do things to get back in balance. You kind of do like the arm circles and the waving. Living in Northern Ontario, where we have lots of snow and ice. I'm sure we've all, walked down the sidewalk or stepped out of our vehicles and done the arm wave. That's a natural built-in response that our body does to kind of get back in balance. And our brain and our body has sort of these built-in mechanisms to try to cope with adversity and a built-in capacity to learn some of these things. I once spoke with this woman who I met with, and she talked to me about, these terrible nightmares that she would have. She would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, and she would have these nightmares about, her history of domestic violence, and have these flashbacks of being domestically abused and being abused in this domestic relationship. And she would wake up in this panic, terrible, awful state, and almost this realization that I'm in my bed, and that thing, that terrible, awful experience, that I just had wasn't real. I'm here in my bed, and it was absolutely awful the way that she described it. And her big question to me was, what do I do about this? How do I cope with this? What should I do to get through these awful flashbacks that I have? And I asked her, what are you doing right now to deal with these experiences that are so awful? And she thought for a second. And she said, once I wake up and I realize I'm in my bed, I get out of bed, I go and grab a glass of water, I drink the water, and then I sit down on my couch and I watch TV. And I watch TV for a bit. It doesn't really matter what's on. Sometimes it's the Weather Network. It's late at night. There's not always a lot of great stuff on TV. But I watch TV for a little bit. And I wait until I feel relaxed, and then I go back to bed. And I thought, that's extraordinary. You have this awful experience, and somehow you're able to do these things to get to a point where you feel relaxed enough to go back to sleep. And I thought, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty astounding. And I asked her, how do you find the courage to do that? This is a pretty scary thing that happens to you when you have these nightmares. How do you find the courage to do that, to get up and have that glass of water and go and watch TV? And she thought for a second, and she very poignantly said to me, it's my life, and I'm not going to let this stuff control me. I'm going to decide how I want to run my life. And then she told me at great length, even though she has these awful flashbacks, these awful nightmares, that she wasn't going to let it hold her back. And she's still going to do all of these great things that she's wanted to do because it's her life. So I popped this quote in here because I thought it kind of really summarized what I was hoping to kind of talk about. At the very least, this strengths perspective obligates workers, or obligates people, to understand that, however downtrodden, sick individuals have survived, and in some cases even thrived. They've taken steps, summoned up resources, and coped. So I'm just going to jump back. I hear you on the line, Krista. Is there a comment or?
Curtis, I have a question.
Certainly.
There's a question. The question is, how can we manipulate our environment to help us better cope with stress about our homes and backyards? Any decorating ideas, colors? I know the color orange is good as an accent, decluttering our space to help our mindset.
So the question is, how can we modify our environments to help cope with stress? I think the short answer is I don't know. I would be more curious to ask you, what might be helpful in your own environment? What kinds of things would you find are helpful? For some people, it's decluttering, and that might help you cope with stress. For other people, it's being okay with clutter. I'm someone who, I get really stressed if there is a lot of clutter, and one of the ways that I'm kind of coping with that and, helping with my stress is to allow some clutter and be okay with clutter. Because that means that I've worked really hard, and that means that I'm, really enjoying what's happening. So I don't think there is a solid gold standard answer for everybody. I think I would put the question back to the person and back to you. What do you think? What do you think would be helpful, or what has been helpful in your environment, even a little bit? And maybe it's, certain colors, maybe it's certain, not having clutter or having things in a certain way or having environments in a certain way. And whatever that thing is, maybe it's the color orange, or maybe it's, having lots of, I don't know, like for me, I like to have comfy clothes on. What difference does that make for you? When you have, I like to dress in layers and have comfy sweaters. It helps me feel more comfortable. And when I feel more comfortable, I feel more relaxed as I'm working and giving talks or meeting with people. And when I'm more relaxed and more comfortable, I feel like I can talk a little bit freer when I'm working. So I would put the question back to you to think about it. What are some things that have been helpful to you, and what difference has that made to you? So this kind of goes with what I'm saying here with this quote, is we need to know what people have done, how they have done it, and what they have learned from doing it. What resources inside themselves and outer resources in their environments and people have helped them in their struggle and have helped them get through their struggles. So I think what I'm saying from the strength-based perspective is there isn't one answer in terms of how to cope. That gentleman that I talked about who was going to those anger management classes to learn coping, there wasn't one kind of coping skill that would be the answer for him. It was him exploring ones that worked for him. And what's important for us in terms of building our coping skills is reflecting on our own experiences, because what works for me might not work for Krista, might not work for you, might not work for others. It's important to figure out those unique individual ways that we are already coping and how they're helpful to us, or how they have been helpful to us in the past. So I'm going to encourage some reflection for you. When you think about going through stressful circumstances, that could be now or it could be in the past, what helped you get by? What was helpful even a little bit? If you're going through some stressful circumstances right now, what's helping even a little bit right now? Given everything that you were dealing with or everything that you are dealing with now, how are you managing as well as you are? How are you still managing to get up, get dressed, go about the day-to-day? How are you managing to do that? I met with somebody once who came in and said he was really not doing well. He had a huge upset in his life. His life was just turned upside down, and felt like he was really alone and had no place to go, and was staying with a friend and didn't know what he was going to do. And he came in to meet with me at the office for an appointment. And one of the things I asked him was, given that you're dealing with all this stuff and you feel like your life's turned upside down, how did you manage to get here for the appointment? How did you manage to show up on time? How did you manage to get dressed? How did you manage to get on the bus? How did you manage to figure out where to go? You somehow figured out how to do all those things. And I'm just curious, how did you do that stuff? And what he told me was he just focused on one thing at a time. His mantra was kind of one step at a time, literally, if he, the first thing he had to do was get up, it was literally getting out of bed. The next thing he had to do was find some clothes, so he did that. The next thing he had to do was find some money for the bus, so he did that. The next thing he had to do was wait for the bus. And he told me all of these small victories and small accomplishments that he was able to do just by thinking about the next thing. Sometimes we really deal with situations that are huge. They're challenging. They're really difficult. They really test us. They really make that tightrope really wobbly. It's a big gust of wind. And sometimes it's important to think, what are we currently doing to prevent the situation from getting worse? What are some things that we're doing to put the brakes on a little bit? I've got my dog who runs around my house, and he has this affinity for socks, and one of my goals is to train him to not chew up socks and clothing and things. So we're working on that. But one of the things I'm doing to prevent that from getting worse is, try to keep all the laundry in the laundry baskets and behind closed doors and out of reach. He's a little bit like a Wile E. Coyote and can manage to maneuver into things and push doors open with his head like a rhino. But I'm trying to stay one step ahead of him, and I'm trying to, pick up after myself to prevent him from eating through all of the socks I own. But sometimes that's as much as we can do, is figure out, and I know that's kind of a silly example, but sometimes that's as much as we can do is try to hold the reins and at least try to do some things to prevent that situation from getting worse. One other thing might be, is what are we doing that's keeping us going? If you're sitting here, you're listening to me, you're breathing, you're surviving. If you're going through some difficult circumstances, you're still upright and moving and getting about. There's something that's keeping you going, some kind of energy, something inside you that's helping you pull through and giving you a little bit of a nudge to keep you going. And it might be helpful to kind of wonder, what do you think that might be? Sometimes, people have said to me, it's people in their life. It's their kids. They got to be there to be there for their kids, even during tough times. It's their family. It's their friends. Going through a loss in their life, when someone has passed away or there's grief, that can be really challenging. And one of the things that helps people keep going is connecting to other people and being there with their family. Sometimes it's people's work and meaning in their life. They got to be there to because if they didn't show up and they weren't able to do that job, a piece of them would be missing. So I'm curious to hear from you. What are you doing to get by? What are some things that you do to cope? And how is that helpful to you?
Curtis, we have a question.
Sure.
What are you doing to get by? What are some things that you do to cope? And how is that helpful to you?
Curtis, we have a question.
I'm ready for you, Krista.
We were wondering if there's a child-friendly, simplified building resilience worksheet available that we could use with some of the children we support. So I believe it's from some of our...
We have a bit of audio delay, but I think I got your question. The short answer is no. The long answer is I think the questions are pretty universal, so you can certainly change the language a little bit and ask kids, what's helpful to them. Because we know, I think deep down, we know what's helpful to us and we know what's not. I don't know. I think typically when I ask people that question, what's helpful to you, or if they did something, if they said, I was really stressed out on the weekend because I had all these things to do, so I ate a bag of Doritos, a whole bag, top to bottom. Was that helpful to you? I think I could probably give you an honest answer that on one hand, it is helpful in one sense because I love Doritos and it tasted good and it got my mind off of whatever was bothering me. But maybe in the long run, it's not really helpful to eat a bag of Doritos anytime I feel frustrated. What I do want to highlight is, and Krista, feel free to chime in if there's other comments or questions about what people are doing to get by. But what I do want to emphasize is whatever you're doing to cope, it is helpful to you at least a little bit. If it wasn't helpful to you at all, you wouldn't do it. So even eating the bag of Doritos, even getting really frustrated and like letting out a big sigh, it does something for you. Letting out that big sigh, it offers a moment of relief and gives you some kind of relief. Maybe it's not the most appropriate thing to do when I'm in a meeting with somebody, but it's helpful in some sense. It's helpful in one way. So I would encourage you to think about, what are you currently doing to get by? What are you currently doing to cope? And what has helped you even a little bit? And how is that thing helpful to you? I'm going to take a little pause and I'll let Krista chime in if there's comments, and it'll give me an opportunity to have a sip of my coffee.
One comment, Curtis, was supporting kiddos going back to school with the adult, not adult, but the high school classes and the semesters is making a calendar so that though the days are very long, it's nice to click off the whole day in the calendar, and it puts a more realistic perspective of their new semester system at school.
That's great. So I don't know if you heard Krista's comment that was read through the phone, that she elicited through the phone, but it was having a calendar and kind of checking off the days going through the school days, for a child that might be struggling with the long days of going back to school. For sure, that sounds like that would be helpful. Sorry, Krista, I realize you're hearing the audio twice. Is there any other comments?
Sorry, Krista, I realize you're hearing the audio twice. Is there any other comments?
Not at this time.
Great. One of the interesting things that happens when we're in the thick of it, when we're feeling really stressed, when we are faced with a problem or a challenge, is it really narrows our view and really narrows our ability to kind of have some perspective. And sometimes all we focus on is that stress or that problem. But the reality is, no problem or stress or event, difficult situation happens all of the time, 100% of the time, and happens at 100% intensity all of the time. There's always moments where things are a little bit better. There's always moments of relief. There's always moments where the problem isn't as intense. There's always at least some moment where that problem doesn't happen. Even in the thick of winter in February, you know, when we're stuck with all this snow, there are days where it doesn't snow. And thank goodness, you know, where we live, it's not winter all year round. There's always shining moments of, at least one shining moment of some relief. So exceptions are times when this problem or this stress doesn't occur, or it's a time when that stress or that problem isn't quite as bad. Now, you know, sometimes these exceptions and these times they're hard to find. They're hidden, like I said, kind of in plain sight. So when we're in the thick of the problem, it's hard to only see that problem. So we might have to kind of put on our thinking caps and think back in time about, you know, a moment when a time in our life or a time recently when that stress wasn't quite so bad, or that problem wasn't happening to that full extent. And there's important clues in these moments. There's important information about these times that can be really helpful to us, that we really want to zero in on. So I think I must have had a rough weekend with my dog, so I'm using my dog as an example. But you know, I might ask myself, this stress with my dog where he's running around and, you know, chewing up my books and my socks and all these things, I want to think about a time when he wasn't doing that. Think about a time when, for whatever reason, he wasn't the socks were in plain sight, or he wasn't trying to grab the books and grab the things. When was that? When was that time that thing happened? When did that moment happen? And we might not know an exact date, you know, we might not know an exact time, and that's completely okay. But we want to start to be curious and look for those times of that exception. Look for those times when the problem wasn't as bad, and times when that stress wasn't as bad. And we want to start thinking about some of those, some follow-up questions. You know, so when was this? What was happening? Where were you? Who was there? What were you doing? What did you notice was different at that time? Who else noticed that change? Who else noticed that the stress wasn't as bad, or that there was this moment of relief? What else was different, you know, about that time? And there are some important ingredients about that time. There are some important things that contributed to that moment of relief, that contributed to that exception. It didn't just happen by accident. There were some things that you did and some things that others did to help that moment of relief occur. So if I think about my dog, one of the things that I figured out by thinking about, you know, those times when he was a little bit more well-mannered, it's when I gave him lots of exercise. We would go out for a lot of walks. I would play a lot of ball with him, and he would come in and you would almost see this happy kind of dog smile on his face. And you know, he had really got lots of attention and got lots of exercise in, and that really helped. That really helped fill a need for him, and helped prevent him from being as interested in the socks and tearing, you know, the house apart. So there are some moments that happen for you. It's not a matter of if they happen, they do happen. And I would really encourage you to think about when those moments are. And as I keep talking, I'll invite Krista to hear your comments and chats about, you know, what are some times that you've noticed things were a bit better, even a little bit. What are some times that you noticed that this stress wasn't as bad? for some of the people that I've worked with, it might be having humor and telling jokes and playing games. It was a relief for them in whatever frustration was kind of going on in their life. And they noticed that when they were telling jokes with people, that it really just lifted this kind of this frustration from their life, and all those problems kind of just melted away, at least for those moments. So I'll invite you to kind of think about your life, think about a period of time. One thing you could do is think about your week. Maybe you'll think about the last week, and if you had to pick a day where things were a little bit better, which day would you pick? Would you say Monday was better than Tuesday? Would you say, Monday was better than Wednesday, then Thursday, then Friday? Which moment was even a little bit better than the other? And whatever day you kind of pick, what was different about that day? What happened? What were you doing differently? What helped contribute to, Tuesday being better than Wednesday? Another great kind of question that I ask sometimes, and that can be helpful, is to imagine that your life is a movie. And if you were thinking about your stress, and thinking about having the most relief from stress, and we were to record your life from the time that you were born right up until now, and we were to watch this movie, and I were to ask you to press pause at a moment where you had the least amount of stress, where we were to watch it and we would say, wow, this is really you showing the least amount of stress, or really coping with that stress in the best way possible. When would you hit pause in that movie? What were you doing? What was happening? Who was there? Who else would have noticed this moment for you? So there's some important clues there, and I would really encourage you to look for them. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but Krista, if there's any other comments floating in the chat, I would love to hear from you. If you've ever had a family member or had somebody in your life that maybe you don't see for years, and kids are a great example because
One of the comments was, when I have a plan, I always feel a little bit better about my day and how things are going. I think if I put a pause on my life, they're saying, when I was a child, I had no responsibility and all my needs were met by somebody else and I could do whatever I wanted.
Great, so two good comments. One of them was, whenever I have a plan, I feel better and I'm able to go about my day in a better sense. I don't know if I quite got it there, but when I have a plan, that somehow that's helpful to me. That's great. That's great that you're able to recognize that plan makes a difference for you. Some great follow-up questions to that would be, what do you notice is different? What else do you notice is different for you when you have that plan? What do you do differently when you have a plan? What's different about how you go about your day? What's different about how you, I don't know what your day might look like, whether it's going to meetings, whether it's chatting with people, whether it's doing paperwork. What's different about that? What's different about the end of your day? What's different about how what other people notice about you when you have a plan? And those are all important questions because there's some important details about how that plan, having that plan makes a positive impact in your life. That's great. And the other one was, being a child when you had no responsibilities and, you were able to kind of do what you want. I think a lot of people, being a child, a lot of people would kind of agree with that, and wasn't that great. I might ask you a little bit further, what difference that made to you, having no responsibilities, and what difference that made to you in terms of having all your needs met. And, I think we would both agree that that's probably not something that we could continue with now, about having no responsibilities and having all of your needs met. But what I'm curious about is, are there any moments now in your life where you find yourself having a little less responsibility? Are there any moments in your life now where you find yourself having even some of your needs met a little bit? And I wonder what some of those moments are. If there's any moments a little in your adult life where you find yourself having a little less responsibility and a little less, or a little more of your needs met, when that might be. I hear your voice, Krista. Is there another question or a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we had another comment come in that said, when I make time for my yoga, or when I make time for walks in nature and take time to myself, I feel that I'm better able to cope, and I feel like I'm better able to handle my day. So the days that I push myself to get up and do those things, my day always seems to go so much better. Even if I have struggled throughout the day, I feel like I can just cope with those better. Just wondering if you have a recommendation for any meditation or other strategies that I could use throughout my day while I'm working.
So really great comment from somebody. The comment was, I notice when I make time for myself, whether it's going for walks, doing yoga, being in nature, and when I push myself to do that. And I like that you added that. I think it really shows that that's important to you, and you really somehow find the time and find a way to push yourself to do that. And I'm curious about how you do that. How do you push yourself to make that time? Because certainly that's not always an easy thing to do amidst juggling lots of responsibilities and having lots of things to do. But somehow you're able to push yourself to make that time to do those things when you start your day. I wonder if you can... I'm curious about that, how you're able to do that. And in terms of, and Krista, there was a specific question about, what was the specific question at the end? Recommendations regarding?
The recommendations were regarding meditation or a practice that I can utilize while I'm at work.
All right, great question. So how to use some of those practices while at work? I don't have any specific ideas about how to do that, but it sounds like something that you want to do in terms of how to do that while at work. I wonder if it's something, I would ask if you've ever been able to do that, if you've ever been able to somehow make time to do those practices while at work. Has there ever been a moment that you've been able to make time for, meditation, going for walks, doing some of those things that have been helpful to you? Maybe there has, and maybe you can think back and narrow in on a time that you were able to do that. If the answer, if you can't think of anything, and the answer is no, there hasn't ever been a time that I've been able to do that meditation and do that yoga while at work. Maybe that's something to think about. If somehow you were able to do some of that meditation while at work, or start to bring some of those practices into your everyday work, how might you do that, or what might that look like? What would need to change in order for you to start to bring some of those practices into work? Krista, I heard you on the line. Is there another comment or question?
Yes, supporting children with in school or in daycares. Wondering if it would be a good recommendation to incorporate some kind of skill building or model that the group can work with, so that we can help kiddos that are struggling with some of the COVID and some of the changes that are happening in school as well as in daycare. Children often, when we ask them the questions, aren't able to answer those, but do you have a way we could try to work through maybe an activity to try to get some of that information?
So, can we somehow incorporate skill building or some kind of group to get that information from kids about how to cope with changes with COVID? I'm sure you could. Do I have a list of here's how you do it? Unfortunately, I do not. It might be something for further thought. Working with children and working with people that have other resources, like a support team or parents or caregivers, sometimes it's helpful to include them in the conversation. It's always important, as much as you can, to include children or the person that you're caring for into those conversations, because I think they really can tell you if something's helpful or not, or what they would like to see happen. But I think we can ask these kind of questions to parents and caregivers about, has there ever been a time when Johnny was really able to handle stress and get through? And what do you think Johnny is really good at? What's a time when you and Johnny were really able to get through a hard time, or really accomplish something and achieve something? And how did you both do that? What do you think Johnny did to help contribute to that success? What do you think you did as the parent, the teacher, the caregiver to help contribute to that success? So to answer the question, I don't have anything. This is exactly how you could approach the school or the daycare or kids. But I think working with kids and working with people who sometimes we're providing support to, including parents, caregivers, people who are an important resource in their life, when we're asking those questions, can really help provide some useful information. So one of the things that happens sometimes as we're dealing with the day-to-day is that everything starts to look the same. And we start to dismiss and not notice changes that happen, even positive changes. So I often think about this with kids and with children and nieces and nephews. If I don't see them for some time, if I don't see them for a couple of months or a period of time, and it's like they've shot up 3 feet, and I see them and I go, oh my goodness, you've like all of a sudden you're an adult, like you're a full-grown man now. When did this happen? It seems like just yesterday I saw you and you were yay high, and now you're yay high and you're driving and you're doing all these adult things, and but they don't always notice those changes. Parents, they see their kids day in and day out, and they don't, maybe they do pull out the measuring stick and measure their height and notice those changes, but it's not as dramatic. And I think the way that our brains are wired sometimes, we tend to put things in categories and see things as the same. But the reality is that everything changes on a day-to-day basis and a moment-to-moment basis. There's this old, one of the ancient Greeks, this philosopher talked about how, you can't step into the same river twice because it's not the same river and you're not the same man or you're not the same person. And what he's kind of saying is, when you think about the river and all the grains of sand and all the debris and all the things floating, the river is always moving. There's all the molecules and all the things in that river are constantly changing and constantly in motion. And when we look at that river, all we see is the river and the water, and it looks like the same river. But when you zero in and you put on, you get that microscope and you put on that investigator hat and look closely, it's not the same river. Things are always moving and things are always changing. And the same thing with us, and the same thing within our bodies and our minds and our lives. Things are not the same on a day-to-day basis and even on a moment-to-moment basis. So the reality is that change is inevitable. Change does happen. It's a guarantee that things will change. And it can be really helpful to us if we're starting to look for and starting to zero in on some of those changes, because there's some clues in that. There's some clues in some of the specifics and some of the things that progress and change over time. And we might pull out some of those strengths to help us deal with stress and build some resiliency. I often use this sort of 1 to 10 scale when I'm talking to people about change and about progress. And I have these wonderful numbers of 1 to 10, and you can kind of look at it, as a step ladder or look at it as bar graphs. I do a lot of bar graphs and graphs, so those are fun to me. But we'll look at these numbers 1 to 10. We'll think about these numbers 1 to 10. And if you think about your current circumstances with coping with stress and coping with whatever circumstances you're dealing with, and we were to say 1 means the worst it has been, the worst this stress has been for you. Not the worst it could be, the worst this stress has been for you. And 10 means the exact opposite. 10 means things aren't perfect, because life's not perfect and there's always going to be things that pop up. But 10 means you're pleased with how you're handling the circumstances. You're pretty content with how you're managing and coping and dealing with that stress. Where would you say you're at right now on that scale of 1 to 10? So you can say your number in your head, you can post it in the chat or that email to Krista. You can circle it on your handout, but where would you say you're at right now? Maybe you're at a 1, a 2, a 3, whatever number you're at. And if I think about for me, that stress of managing my ill-mannered dog at home, maybe I'm at about a 6. And for me, I feel like, there's moments where he can be polite and there's moments that he can be well behaved. And sometimes it takes him some time to warm up to people. And initially he's kind of unruly and excited, but once he kind of gets to know you and once things are pretty set out in stone, he can be a little bit better behaved, and it's certainly better than it used to be. So where would you say that you're at? And I'll say that whatever number you rate yourself as, they're all okay. Any rating that you give yourself is okay. Sometimes people ask me, what number should they be at or what number makes sense? And I'm asking you what you think. I'm asking you what number you feel you're at. So if you chose the numbers between 2 and 10, meaning you circled the number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. What I'm curious about is, how did you get from 1 to whatever number you arrived at? So for me, I said I was at a 6. How did I get from a 1 to a 6? Or maybe you said you were at a 4 or a 3. How did you get from a 1 to a 4? What did you do, or what changed from, when things were at a 1 to now that things are at a 4? What's happening now that you're at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10? What's happening now that wasn't happening when you were at that 1? And feel free to post in the chat or send an email to Krista. I would love to hear from you. You might, ask some follow-up questions. What are you doing differently now that you're at this number? Who's noticed this change in you? What might have helped you get to that number that you're at now? For me, training Charlie, it was a lot of practice. I think I've learned that practice is important, and counting the blessings of the baby steps. There's some things that he can do now and be prompted really easy, and a lot of it was practicing it over and over and over and over. So one of the skills that I used was dedication and consistency, because it was really important for me that, I can sit down and eat dinner without him jumping up and trying to eat food off my plate and grab things out of the laundry bin. I really wanted to have more peace, I suppose, in my life at home. If you chose number 1, that's okay. Number 1, I said it's the worst that the stress has been for you. You must have some really good reasons for saying that things are really the worst that they have been right now. There must be a lot of things going on for you that are quite challenging.
One of the comments was, things that help me with stressful situations is learning what I can control and let go of the rest, including relationships.
That's great. So the comment, in case you didn't hear, was learning what I can control versus what I can't control. That's a big one, and I can definitely empathize with that. And some follow-up questions I might have with that are, how did you do that? How did you learn what you can control and what you can't control? I mean, it sounds something that I think is deceptively simple. Someone can say to you, well, you should think about what you can control and what you can't control. But it's probably a lot more challenging to put that into practice. So how did you do that? How did you learn what you can control and what you can't control? I might also wonder, what difference has that made for you? Now that you're able to know what you can control and what you can't control, what difference has that made to you with your stress? What are you now able to do that might have been a bit of a challenge before? What do you notice about yourself now that you're able to appreciate what you can control versus what you can't control? So I was saying, for those of you that have said that you're at a 1 right now, I would encourage you to think about, what are you doing right now to get by? What's helping you get by even a little bit? Somehow you're sitting here hearing my conversation.
The response from the writer, it took a long time and self-reflection on what I wanted in my life.
Yeah, so the comment about, I think it was around what I can control versus what I can't control, was it took a long time, and it must have taken a lot of patience and a lot of dedication. And those are admirable traits. There's some things that don't happen overnight. Change sometimes takes time. So for those of you who are at a 1, what's helping you get by even a little bit, and what's helping you even find some moments of relief. If you're able to somehow find a moment of a little bit of relief, what's helping you do that? So I did say that change is inevitable. Change, will happen, but we don't always notice it. I don't always notice, or my in-laws don't always notice when my nephews grow, because they see them day after day after day. But I notice when I see them perhaps once every couple of months. So those changes are sometimes hard to spot, and sometimes they're hidden in plain sight. So what I would encourage you to do, whatever number you said you were at in terms of the scale of 1 to 10, is I would encourage you to think about what's going to be different when you're half a point higher. What's going to be different when you're 0.5 of a step higher? So if you said you were at a 4, what's going to be different when you're at a 4.5? What will you notice is happening when you're at a 4.5? Who do you think would notice when you're at that 4.5? Who would be the first person to notice that you're starting to cope with that stress a little bit better? Who would be the first person to notice that something's different about you? And what do you think they would notice? Something would give them that idea that something's a little bit different for you. What do you think you'll be doing differently when you're that half a point higher? And what else will be different? What else will be different when you're half a point higher? One of the important things about change, and I'll invite you guys to post in the chat and send your comments to Krista with those questions that I just listed. What's going to be different when things are half a point higher? One of the important things about change is changes don't happen in isolation. And what I mean by that is change kind of permeates our life. If we go back to one of the first slides and we talked about stress, and I had all those little circles with our physical stress and mental stress and cognitive stress and relationships, just as stress can affect all those different systems in our life, all those different categories, positive changes can do the exact same thing. So when I say what else is going to be different as you start to cope with stress a little bit better, it's because when we start to make those positive changes, it starts to affect other areas of our life. If I think about somebody who that gentleman I spoke about a while back with learning anger management and learning how to cope with his frustration, and he told me about all these wonderful things that he started to do and started to realize about himself and how he was able to handle his frustration and handle handle himself after these conflicts. And these weren't things that I told him to do and things that he read from a book or got from a class. These were things that he was already doing, but he wasn't fully aware of these strengths and aware of these coping skills. But the more we talked about it, the more he started to realize, I do have some ways to handle my anger. It was really amazing to see how it resulted in some